What were the first 100 days of Donald Trump's presidency memorable for? Why does Trump want to give Putin Crimea, which neither of them owns? And what did Steve Vitkov come to Moscow for? These are the topics of our conversation today. My name is Irina Uzlova, and today with us is, as regularly, Yuriy Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and local elected official in Wisconsin. Yuriy, hello, glad to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So wants to leave Crimea for the Russian Federation and go down in history by expanding the United States. Donald Trump, American president, gave an extensive interview to Time, which is dedicated to 100 days by coming to power for a second term. I think we have had a very successful presidency in first 100 days. There are people writing that it was the best first month, the best second month, and actually the best third month of my presidency, told Trump. All I am doing is what I said. I do my job very well. I'm in a great physical shape, and unlike any other president, I took a cognitive test too and got 100%. I bet you guys couldn't get 100% of that test, told Trump to journalists. But I have another news, which told us that Trump breaks anti-record, why his 100-day approval rating is worse than Biden and Obama. On the 100th day of his presidency, Donald Trump is facing the lowest approval rating of any recent U.S. president. His approval rating is even lower than his own 8 years ago. According to the latest polls, Trump's overall job performance approval rating on his 100 days is only 44. This is lower than the approval ratings of former U.S. President Joe Biden, for example, 50 for Barack Obama, 62, and George Bush, 63, after their 100 days in the office. So, Yuriy, how do you rate? What can the American leader boast about during this term? How do Americans rate his first 100 days? And in any case, the first 100 days have not become the last so far.
Well, first 100 days of second presidency of Donald Trump, I guess, can be compared by its historical lack of popularity only against the first time Donald Trump was president, when he also was given very low marks consistently, and the numbers went down because in the end it ended up with COVID. Right now, we're just at the beginning of this supposedly 4-year journey. If all goes well for everybody, because Donald Trump said he's in good health, so I guess provided neither that nor impeachment gets him, he's going to be president for the next 3.5 years. So there's a lot of room to grow in the opposite direction, in a sense that there is a suspicion that Donald Trump's kind of floor is not like the bottom, which he cannot go under because he can always go lower, but it's accepted that's about 32%. So kind of like there's, no matter what he says, this is that kind of a Fifth Avenue argument that he can go out and shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and he wouldn't lose any support. That lose any support currently is believed to be at about 32%. Whether that is reality or whether reality can affect those numbers, we're learning right now, because slowly but surely the Donald Trump is losing popularity, which is a good thing, really, because when he loses popularity suddenly and a lot due to some catastrophic event, then it usually bounces back. But when it just systematically erodes, every poll shows a little bit lower, it really just highlights the dreadful situation that the United States is in right now. And that is, we are uncertain. What Donald Trump has done in less than 100 days is he destroyed confidence in the United States, that confidence that people from outside of the United States have in the United States, but even more fundamentally, confidence that people inside the United States have about the United States itself. It is really a tremendous accomplishment that hard to imagine. I mean, I think Americans felt similar feel of kind of a disempowerment and diminishment after 9/11, when we realized that terrible things can occur. But right now, the feeling is more global, and you can see it in small things. You can see it in big things. You can see how we're not helping Ukraine like we were when President was Biden, and there's certain sense of certainty there, but maybe uncertain. Maybe Donald Trump will do so. There's uncertainty, I guess, there. But then there's on local level when people don't know whether to buy or sell houses that they live in. We in America don't know right now. Like the real estate market is kind of really dramatically slowed down. And of course, this is an opportunity for administration to say, hey, well, the bad things have happened in the past. Come on, let's get real. There's always, this kind of like, let's get real attitude. But their let's get real attitude crashes into reality, which is that this is just the beginning of, I'm not going to say beginning of the end, because I think that is in a way what Donald Trump and his ilk want, is that they want this kind of the old United States to be over with, that, law and order and the government helping those that have been disadvantaged and helping everyone compete. No. Enough of that. But this approach within 100 days has brought tremendous results, because when people have no confidence, what are we supposed to do? And so everything else is just coming out of that lack of certainty about whether to invest money here or there, whether just anything. People are really uncertain about to apply for a job or to quit a job, sell a house, buy a house. And this is no way to have a successful anything. So it's very dangerous precipice that some optimists may say that we're still on the precipice. And I think a more realistic approach is that we have already walked off the precipice. And now we are going down, and we're going, well, we've been down this way before, but rarely so fast and all together. When they're comparing the situation to April of 1932 and Great Depression, not recession. Recession was 5 minutes ago in 2008. Now we're talking about Great Depression again. And by the way, there were tariffs there too. And there were also bread lines and soup lines, and Americans don't remember that. We have some black and white imagery that's supposed to remind us of how our grandparents live and how we never ever going to be there. But now we're not so certain about that either. But at the same time, we have our iPhones. So life is not so bad.
Yuri, now we see that a lot of problems can we expect by Donald Trump in the whole world, not only really inside the United States of America. It concerns our Russian-Ukrainian war already too. And today, U.S. President Donald Trump told to the Times that it was a joke, only about 24 hours to end Russian-Ukrainian war. And then today he told media representatives about new information about deadlines, flying to Italy, where he was going to participate in the farewell ceremony with Pope Francis. And Trump said that he is not setting specific deadlines for reaching peace agreements between Russia and Ukraine, although he previously mentioned the existence of a certain deadline for concluding a peace agreement. Now, Trump assures the main thing is speed, not deadlines, and my desire is to achieve peace as soon as possible. Why? Why without deadlines?
This is a really important question, because when Donald Trump said that 24 hours was really meant as perhaps even a joke, he was absolutely right. Because when I was speaking we had a town hall for our local congressman who did not show up to meeting with his constituents. He was notified, and in fact, when I was streaming it on some social media platform, I actually saw that he tuned in and he was watching the town hall meeting. But he was there, and so I mentioned in my speech when I spoke, because it was a town hall meeting, everybody had 2 minutes. During my 2 minutes, I mentioned Ukraine, and I mentioned that there was a 24-hour mention. And you know how people responded there? They laughed. So, maybe 24 hours was just not the way that Donald Trump perhaps intended it. too. It's very clear that Donald Trump has a goal of having good relations with Vladimir Putin. And everything that goes outside of that is some kind of a pretense. However, we saw a lot of people who were willing to pretend to themselves, to their own detriment, that Donald Trump was going to be better for Ukraine than Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris would have been. And I think it is, first of all, just remarkable to what extent people feel that it is a responsibility of Democrats. The Democrats did not put up a better candidate, and therefore Donald Trump won, which is such an amazingly brazen statement, because it is a responsibility of each voter to look at the information presented. And it wasn't very difficult to see that Donald Trump was going to do what he's doing because he's doing what he's done before and what he said he was going to do. So when people were taking his statements and ignoring them, don't blame somebody else afterwards. It just seems a little ludicrous to do that. So I think that Democrats really here it's really remarkable to what extent it is irrelevant what Democrats do. Democrats could all become transgendered and they could all win on elections because it's about Donald Trump and what he's doing to destroy this country. And at least that's how people, if they feel that way, then they're going to vote for the alternative, which may have a strategy, may not have a strategy. It doesn't matter, does it? So that's what I'm talking about. So I think responsibility here lies on each person who really, frankly, criticized in Ukrainian informational space Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, saying that they were not helping enough and their aid was a teaspoon of an aid, or, because this was paving the way for what we have now. And that is no teaspoon of help. In fact, no help at all. And in fact, Donald Trump is desperately, clearly trying to make it to Red Square with Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping on May 9th. And this is his understanding of realism. Let's get real. He wants to stand next to Putin, next to Xi on May 9th, and that is his deadline. He doesn't care about 24 hours. He could have called it a slam dunk, but you wouldn't expect him to take a basketball and slam dunk it, but you expected him to get things done in 24 hours. Well, who is the fool here? So he really wants to be there for the division of the Yalta tool, for the, I guess you can't divide the world over Zoom, and you have to be there in person, and he's really trying. Although it's interesting because Peskov of Kremlin said that, Donald Trump is not expected here on May 9th, which I think is pretty rude, considering how hard President Trump is trying to make it and how hard he's trying to get Ukraine to surrender and to capitulate and to sign whatever agreement is placed in front of Ukrainian president, so that Donald Trump could not just get Nobel Peace Prize, but to be with Vladimir Putin in Kremlin on May 9th. And time is running out. And I think, to me, that is just as much of a reason to explain why Donald Trump is upset about Ukraine refusing to surrender as anything. I don't think that 24 hours matters to anybody anymore. We know that. It's like price of eggs. Turned out that his voters really didn't care about price of eggs. And the 100 days really doesn't matter to anybody either. It's an imaginary time that is good for YouTube videos and magazine articles, but it doesn't really matter. But it matters to Vladimir Putin to wrap up the war and to win the war in Ukraine as he sees it, and he's clearly putting pressure on Donald Trump to get it done. And so Donald Trump is doing everything he can, and the only thing he doesn't control in this equation is Ukraine. And that's where Putin is trying to help him by being the so-called kind of a bad cop here, where he's trying to attack and be particularly brutal like he hasn't been in months to Ukrainians. So Putin is shooting rockets at Ukraine, and my condolences to everybody in Ukraine who has to live through this. And at the same time, we see Donald Trump who says, "Oh, amazing, horrible Putin, please be merciful to this pitiful little Ukraine." Surrender, he says to Ukraine. And at the same time, "Oh, the amazing, horrible Putin can kill so much. Please don't do it. You're not helping. We're trying. We almost have an agreement here. Come on, sign the capitulation." And it's so obvious how this is being portrayed. And yet, I gotta say that I see articles, news stories that say, "Oh, Donald Trump for the first time has said no to Vladimir Putin." Really? Come on now. So I think that there's a little bit of context that sometimes is getting lost, but the deadline is clearly there, and it is not anybody's but Vladimir Putin's and Donald Trump's, and it's just seems it explains the desperation with which Donald Trump is trying to get the situation resolved, showing his weakness in the process and weakness of America. Every time it's showing our weakness with China, it's showing our weakness with Putin, it's showing our weakness with anybody, because that's how Donald Trump unfortunately operates, is by projecting his weakness on others, because projecting strength would be doing the opposite of what he does.
Really, we see that Trump doesn't use any pressure or sanctions against Putin, only some stop words, Vladimir stop, and we even thought which Vladimir he meant yesterday. At the same time, Trump believes that Putin will stop the sharing, but Putin continues to kill peaceful Ukrainians with missiles and drones right during that statements and after these calls. So what kind of games with stop words are these we see?
It's very difficult sometimes to give a reasonable explanation to what Donald Trump is doing unless you presume that he works for Russia. If you go, but let's imagine he works for Russia, then does everything line up? And we go, yeah, then everything lines up. Then the only problem you could say, well, you know, if he was Russian agent, he would do it faster. Well, I'm sorry, he's trying, he's being limited by the Congress and courts, but he's really clearly, that's the one explanation that seems to put everything else together really nicely and make the whole thing fit together. Now, what does that leave us? That leaves us in a terrible, terrible situation in the United States, where it's much easier for us to think that our president is just inept. Maybe it's dementia. Maybe it's Alzheimer's. I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose things. But clearly, he doesn't make sense. I don't know. He always makes sense for Russia. He doesn't put tariffs on Russia. He doesn't do anything that can possibly hurt Russian interests. And yet at the same time, he's hurting American interests as if he's trying to hurt America and trying to weaken America. I think that when we look at what happened to Voice of America, and to USAID, it's hard to find ways that are more like presents to Putin than anything else, because it's a gift to a dictator when we stop speaking with our voice. In fact, it is such a big gift to Putin that it was even more important than to even rebrand Voice of America as Voice of Donald Trump, which is kind of what I think would have been reasonable to expect. I mean, Kari Lake was put in charge. It was going to be Voice of Trump, but they were so interested in gutting everything and making America weak that they couldn't even do that. They just had to gut Voice of America. And we see the same thing with USAID, and it strengthens China, if anything. It strengthens Putin. It strengthens every dictator out there. And it doesn't do anything to help America. It doesn't even help Donald Trump, which makes a lot of people be suspicious of how good a negotiator he is. I mean, yes, he wrote a book, Art of the Deal, but at the same time, there's a chapter in there on his successful casino. And we know that's one of his 6 bankruptcies. So there's some really kind of a problems with the story, but when people want to believe, and that's why I find it so remarkable being a YouTuber to a large chunk of extent of my time these days, with a large amount of audience viewership in Ukraine, where I see how differently people are now viewing Donald Trump than they did before he and Vice President J.D. Vance did what they did with President Zelensky on February 28th at the White House, because people in Ukraine have lost faith in Donald Trump. They've kind of lost faith in America slowly, and it's kind of going there. They're hoping that America can do something here to change things, but they've lost that belief that Donald Trump is going to come and get things done and fix things. And unfortunately, the price of awakening sometimes is that it's very late. And I don't think it's too late, because I think there's Europe. I think that there's, frankly, inept Russian military. But we see President of the United States who is doing everything he can to throw the victory into the arms of Russia. And why is he doing that? Maybe it's because he loves dictators, as Ann Applebaum says, and I respect Ann Applebaum very much. Maybe it's because, he wants to be one of them. Or maybe it's his business deals that he's going to supposedly do with Putin that you got to be a fool to believe in, because that's Russia we're talking about, whatever. But I think that there's just a really simpler, more direct explanation that makes things fit together so much easier. And it was a big problem for people on Earth to admit that Earth is not flat, because that's what they believed for a long time. But once people realized and considered the possibility that Earth revolves around sun, like Donald Trump revolves around Vladimir Putin, then a lot of things just suddenly make a lot more sense.
We saw a fourth meeting between Kremlin dictator Vladimir Putin and U.S. President's special envoy Steve Vitkov. This meeting has ended today in Moscow. It lasted 3 hours. Putin's aide Yuriy Rashkin said about these details. Putin and Vitkov's conversation brought the U.S. position closer together, not only on Ukraine, but also on other international issues, Putin's advisor Yuriy Rashkin added. And told the parties discussed the possibility of resuming direct talks between representatives of Russia and Ukraine. The talks made it possible to further bring the position of Moscow and Washington closer together, not only on Ukraine, but also on other international issues. And, this general phrases you understand, but we saw exactly that Steve Vitkov again smiled to Putin, that he shook hands with the Russian killer again and again, like when they met on St. Petersburg previous time. How can his behavior be explained? I don't understand. And what did he come to Russia for? To beg or to demand?
To pick up a new portrait, a statue of Donald Trump?
Yes.
Statue, to replace the Statue of Liberty. Right. We could just send the Statue of Liberty back and Russia will provide us with a new statue of Donald Trump. Could be fake, could be crypto, I don't know. But I think that the relationship right now that Mr. Vitkov has developed with currently single Vladimir Putin is very close. I think that it's interesting that they're sitting, not the opposite ends of the long table, but the kind of the shorter end, and I think that height-wise they match. So much in the relationship. It's about being a right match, and clearly Steve Vitkov is a much better match for Vladimir Putin than somebody else might be, because clearly Mr. Vitkov is there to serve. He is really the official state Department of State and Secretary of State Steve Vitkov, or sometimes maybe he's called in Russian Vityok, Styopa, because he's like a local there. I mean, his grandparents came from Russia. I mean, they probably are horrified would be if they were alive, but they're dead. So Vityok can go back and hang out with Volodya, and then they can hang out and dance in Aqua Discoteca and do whatever they do. And it just shows to Americans two things. First of all, that this is the new normal. That's normal, apparently, for friend of the president, which clearly Steve Vitkov is. He's friend and an influential person in Donald Trump's circle, because if he was not influential, his name would be Kellogg or Marco Rubio, and clearly that's not Steve Vitkov. So people close to president now regularly hang out with Vladimir Putin, paving the way for Donald Trump himself to hang out with Vladimir Putin, because Steve Vitkov here is really more of a stand-in. And the other thing that it shows to America is that our president now is best buds really with the Russian president, and it's not really clear who's looking up to whom in this relationship. Who is the bottom, who's the top here? And it's, I think, is worrisome to more and more people, as is represented by the polls, which do not approve of this behavior. And it seems like it's bad politics to even engage in this kind of a close relationship with Russia. But, what does Donald Trump care for politics or economy or diplomacy or decency? Those things clearly don't make America great like he sees it. So he's taking a different approach through Russia. And it's a deep dive, but he's taking the whole country with him. We don't like it. It's interesting to see popularity of Putin rise up within the Republican Party. That's very worrying, but it's good to see that overall Americans continue to reject Russia and Putin. And no matter how many fake announcements about fake, the peace, the ceasefires that Putin may announce, and that American and Western, particularly American media outlets can promote, saying, "Hey, look, Putin is trying, right? This is what President Trump wants to see." I think Americans still see through this, but at the same time, Americans are very busy realizing that we are in a very hostile situation. And when we see a judge right here, where I happen to live in Wisconsin, a county Milwaukee judge being arrested for issues of dealing with with her job, really, I think that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be very concerned, and there's going to be a lot of people who will be speaking out. But that's how it shows. This is not just somewhere in Washington, D.C., far away. This also affects us right here in Wisconsin forests and cities.
The United States is proposing that Ukraine and Russia freeze the war as part of its peace plan, but it's not peace plan. And like you mentioned, like we understand, this plan of surrender of Ukraine. The document mentions Crimea and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Reuters reports about it. The outlet obtained the full content of U.S. President Donald Trump's peace plan, which U.S. Special Envoy Steve Vitkov, the same Steve Vitkov, presented during talks with Ukraine, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom in Paris on April 17. A permanent ceasefire among these topics. Both sides immediately begin negotiations on the technical implementation of the truce. Security guarantees for Ukraine. Ukraine receives reliable security guarantees. The guarantor states will consist of special group of European countries and non-European countries that wish to participate. Ukraine will not seek NATO membership, but Ukraine may seek, or thanks them very much, European Union membership. The US de jure recognized Russian control over Crimea. The US de facto recognizes Russian control over Lugansk region, and de facto recognizes Russian control part of Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and Kherson regions. Ukraine get back temporarily occupied territories in the Kharkiv region and regains control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant through U.S. oversight and management of the plant. And Ukraine received unimpeded access along the Dnipro River and control over the Kinburn speed. Economic issues and Ukraine's recovery are among these points of this plan. So can we say that really this plan completely meets only Putin's requirement and desires? And why is Trump coming up with such proposals? It's abnormal for us, almost all of them, and Crimea, the first question and the main question.
There's a short way to summarize it. This is bullshit. Because you see, what's happening is they have really two problems here that they're trying to combine into one. And the two problems are that you have a ceasefire, which is stop shooting now, and then you have everything else. And until you can agree on stop shooting now, you can't talk about anything else. And the fact that somehow we're still shooting and we're talking about everything else really highlights how much this is supposed to be Ukraine's capitulation and how much Donald Trump is on the clock. He has to move fast. This is no time for delay if you want to make it to the parade on May 9th. So that means that Ukraine has to surrender by when? April 17th. That should give us enough time to change the bedding in a hotel in Moscow. I mean, it's just ridiculous that we're even talking about this because it's impossible. I mean, yes, you are completely right, Irina. The list is all Russia. There is nothing for Ukraine on that list. But we knew this. I mean, starting with Crimea, and we can talk about how saying that Crimea is a legitimate part of Russia according just to the United States. Never mind about Ukraine. Yes, we know Ukraine, you'll never accept it, whatever. We're not asking you anyway, says Donald Trump. He just says, Donald Trump, can admit that this is now reality because Donald Trump controls reality and it's what he says fit and, whatever. This is a process for negotiations, what reality is. But it also means that the entire Pax Americana collapses because this is the end of the sanctions against Russia because they're all based on Crimea being annexed illegally. This is the end of NATO because that means that nobody will trust us to protect them. This is means that Israel won't trust us either because why would they trust? You can't trust anybody and can't trust the United States and certainly Taiwan. Taiwan, what would with China being ready to take, more active steps, can you trust Donald Trump in this situation? No, this is really more encouraging for aggression of all sorts. So everything that is being done here and trying to create this peace that is really just a recipe for World War III, hopefully is going to be once again stopped by brave Ukrainians who just refuse to surrender and agree to genocide. And I think that this is something that Donald Trump is refusing to understand because to him, if he wants it to be so, then it should be so. And when Ukraine says, we can't even have elections because our constitution says we can't have elections because there's a war. And, Donald Trump is not bothered by those kinds of things as we see right here in the United States. So I think it's important to understand that those people understand strength. They don't understand morals. And everything that is going to be done is going to be done with a position of strength and realism. And realism crashes into reality. But realism is like, oh, you shouldn't have gotten into war with Russia because Russia is so much bigger. But you know what? That's why they play the game. That's what they say in football. And I think that is a beautiful expression because you can have all sorts of expectations of what's going to happen. But that's why you play the game. And the game is such that Donald Trump is having a hell of a time trying to make it to Red Square by May 9th.
Yuriy, thank you. Thank you very much for this conversation, for your time and your position. See you next week. Take care.
Take care.
Host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and local elected official in Wisconsin, Yuriy Rashkin, was with me and with us. We thanks Yuriy, and my name is Irina Uslova. See you next week. Take care.